Yeah, that's exactly right. This is if any of you out there have seen Poltergeist, this is a stitched version of the creepy clown from Poltergeist. And this, I don't know what this is. This is some sort of piece of art that someone gifted me. It's some sort of ceramic alien face, I think. Right. Okay. So this is what it looks like. This is what the first book looks like, anyway. And it is the first book of a trilogy. So really, my first trilogy. I think it's my 11th book, but the first time that I've written a series, really. And it's also the first time I've written for the middle grade audience. And basically, it's kind of an adventure story. All my stuff tends to either be horror or horror adjacent, and this is one that I would call horror adjacent, where it's mostly an adventure story, but horrifying things do happen. Mm-hmm. And that might be surprising because it is about teddy bears. And it kind of, when I was maybe in middle school, I discovered Watership Down, which was I think I learned about it from Stephen King in his book Dance Macabre. I was going through my Stephen King phase, and he talks about Watership Down in that book, which made no sense to me at the time because he was this book about horror, and he's talking about a book about bunny rabbits, which didn't seem to scan.
Yeah.
So I went to the local library. It was a very small town, so a small library, but they did have Watership Down. They had a large print edition. And so it was huge. And I hauled that sucker around, and I read it, and I loved it. And it really impressed me because it was this kind of Lord of the Rings style adventure, that kind of scope, but done with rabbits. And the fact that they were able to, Richard Adams was able to pull off such a feat with rabbits, mm-hmm. were just spectacular to me. And I've always wanted to do something in that vein,
yeah.
Except with teddy bears, who are even more vulnerable than rabbits.
I like that. So I think you touched on something that's really, really cool that can be done super well, which is when you have a story that doesn't necessarily fit its setting traditionally. Watership Down is a great example. By the way, we have a couple of comments in our live stream already. First of all, apparently I was muted, which makes sense because I was not doing the show last time, just running the tech side, so I think I fixed that. Sorry about that. And second, Sarah Gilwater says, the Watership Down animated film was traumatic to see as a kid. So yeah, I remember reading that book as well, and really being taken aback with, you could have replaced, it didn't feel like you could replace the rabbits with just people, because there was something inherently... There were things that were inherently rabbit-like. There was an element to it that was important that they were rabbits, but at the same time, it felt very connectable. And
yeah,
I think that. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that. One of the things that I liked about it so much is that it was really grounded in reality. Mm-hmm. It felt, even though they were talking to each other and they had their mythology that they talked about. Mm-hmm. It was all it dealt with, the biologic realities of rabbits, and it was literally about a certain patch of land that actually existed in the UK. So it was all very grounded, and the Teddies does the same thing. It's it's sort of the opposite of Watership Down. It's very urban, mm-hmm. and so they wake up in a trash dump, and throughout the series they travel closer and closer to the heart of the city, and so they're moving through a very realistic landscape. They may be talking teddies, but they're moving through dilapidated parks and gutters and alleyways and all of these sort of real life places.
Was there a city that you based this city kind of on? Like, is it if someone were in your home city, would they look at it and go, "Oh yeah, this feels right," or does it feel like a generic city, or what was the goal there?
It's fairly generic.
Okay.
I mean, I live in Chicago, so it could be Chicago, but it's what's important is that the trash dump, the landfill, is at the edge of the city, which makes sense. And you move towards the skyscrapers that teddies can see in the distance, and they just move deeper and deeper, which is increasingly dangerous because there's more and more people.
Sure. What can you tell us about the mythology of the teddies? And again, like, I realize this is a hard question to ask because trying to keep it spoiler light. I think spoiler free is impossible, but spoiler light is always the goal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically this story has 5 teddy bears who wake up in the trash dump, and they're brand new. 4 of them are still in their boxes, so they're brand new. They don't know why they've been thrown away. They don't know why they're really alive and moving. All we know for sure is that they're supposed to be on a store shelf, and they're supposed to get picked by a child, and then when the child takes them home and hugs them, they fall into something called forever sleep, which means they just blissfully leave all the troubles of the world behind. And that's what they want. But they do have, one of the teddies does have this innate knowledge of the teddy mythology, which goes back to the first teddy, who is called Proto. And Proto is a when the chips are down for our teddies, they spin yarns about Proto and all the trouble he got into as the first teddy, and how Proto is sort of their Genesis myth. And his Proto story details how the one teddy became a group of teddies, and how that group of teddies then became a factory of teddies. And it goes through this whole process, and eventually it will intersect with the current story in a way that's very meaningful and unexpected.
Okay. Let me ask you, because I feel like it's not just me. I have a tendency, though, as do a lot of people, to sort of anthropomorphize things or objects in my life, and then, like, I weirdly kind of feel guilty when it's time to throw it away. I'm like, oh, like, but this thing has done it did its job, and I like it, and I feel like a connection to it. Was that where... Is that part of why teddies? Because we all... Like, for example, I'm actually probably going to go ahead and grab it. I have my teddy... It was a dog, actually. His old dog, which, I was a great namer as a child, apparently. But I still have him. I'm a grown adult, and he sits in my closet because I can't bear to get rid of him. Is that a universal thing, do you think?
Yeah, I do. I didn't have a teddy bear, but I had a blankie. I had 2 blankies, actually. And my names were just as creative. They were Blanky and Zanky.
Yeah.
And they, it's, and I think we were talking about this off camera, but I vividly remember the day where I had the blankies too, what I thought was I was too old for them, and I there was a slight, even though no one knew that, there was a slight panic in me, like I really shouldn't have these blankies anymore. And I remember the day where I sort of decided I was done with them, and I folded them up and I put them in the storage room, and I can still feel it. It's still poignant, that it's not like putting a pet down, but it's not like super dissimilar either.
Yeah.
It's like there's something about, because you're making the decision, you're saying, I'm putting this away now, this thing that meant something to me. So it's still a kind of poignant memory.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we've got 2 comments in our live chat. One from Brandon Bear said, "I had 2 husky-shaped stuffed slippers as a kid. I named them Righty and Lefty." Yep, seems right. Sarah Gillenwater says, "I have my special rabbits, Miss Bunny and Gray Christmas. Still have them and love them." And Ian Giles comments, "I had a plush spider named Plushy." So yeah, I think that is something that's just sort of part of the makeup of being a kid or being a person. Because like I said, I still have mine, and you're right. I don't remember I don't exactly remember when it was that Old Dog kind of went away, but it's sad. Like, I think about it, and there is I get a little choked up.
Me too.
And so even in hearing you describe, like, you know, the teddies being in the trash can or being in the dumpster in the landfill, I feel bad. I'm like, oh no, why are they in the land? Like, I don't know. And it feels almost kind of like reminiscent of that movie Homeward Bound. Like, they have this journey to get to where they're supposed to be. So I think you definitely have tapped into a really primal sort of human emotion there. But let me ask you. It sounds like, and I've read some of the blurbs on it as well. Part Toy Story, part Lord of the Flies. How do you feel about that? Does that feel true to you?
It's a kind of a tough book to describe. So I think that's not terrible. I mean, Toy Story. Believe it or not, I don't really know Toy Story very well, but I know it's not toys. That I know the basic premise, so I assume that part's pretty accurate. Lord of the Flies is, I think it's going to become, I think that description is going to become more relevant as the book 2 and book 3 come in, because they're, you know, the teddies are born innocent, totally innocent, and that's part of the reason why they're so confused, why they've been thrown away, because they haven't done anything. So they go on this big journey to figure out what they did and if they can reverse it in some way. So they're becoming to if the book's sort of a metaphor about growing up, they have to do they are going to have to do bad things. Like, that's part of growing up. You're not always good.
Yeah.
And so they're going to learn about life and the good things and the awe-inspiring things, and then they're going to learn about bad things, including the bad in themselves. Like, as the longer they're alive, and they're alive longer than they think they're going to be, the more trouble that they get into, and the more they lose more and more of their innocence. And that includes infighting within themselves. So there is sort of this element of the teddies who start as just all friends are going to start conflicting.
Sure. For what it's worth, I did decide. I went and grabbed him. That's Old Dog. And yeah, he's seen better days. He's kind of beat up. My most recent dog, who's now staring at it going, oh, look, a toy, definitely thought he was a toy at one point. So if the teddies, if it's a metaphor for growing up and having to do sort of the negative things that growing up requires, and you know, maybe we're getting a little deep here, but I think it's okay. Do you think that no, this is not a toy for you. Go away. Sorry, one of the dogs is like, oh, good. Do you think that growing up requires a level of hardness? Is that something that's necessary to become an adult?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's, you know, it's something that I think was interesting to me as a kid. And maybe it won't be every kid's cup of tea, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. But I really responded to stories and movies where the main character wasn't just this pure good force who was the upright protagonist. You know, I liked when when the movie or the book acknowledged that we all make mistakes and we do
Sure.
bad things. I mean, any kid who's been on a playground has made fun of another kid. Mm-hmm. So you have to acknowledge that kind of behavior. Like, kids will do that, and then hopefully at some point they'll recognize, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And you have to carry that shame with you, and those are like little scars. Mm-hmm. And how I physicalize that with teddy bears is that they're teddy bears. You can't get rid of the injuries that they have. You know, a rabbit, you scratch it, it'll heal. Teddy bears don't heal. If they lose some stitches or their eye falls out or their arm gets cut off, you know, there's nothing they can do. They carry those scars with them, just as we do emotionally.
I think that's beautiful. So let's shift gears a little bit. Apparently, we're traumatizing people as they're all thinking about all of their toys and how they've left them behind. And I get that because I'm sitting. I went and got my stuffed animal because I was like, no, I just want to hold him for a minute. You mentioned earlier that this is horror adjacent. So, what? Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Sure. I mean, first I should explain that I have a pretty loose definition of horror.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Really, most of my books, and again, this is my 11th book, I think, most of my books, almost all of them, don't have anything supernatural in them. And yet most of them are considered horror. Mm-hmm. It's because they're about horrific things happening, you know? Like, you could have, but that's normal. I mean, you could have a movie that was, about some sort of, like, slasher attacking people. Well, there's nothing supernatural there, but it's still a horror story. So I use the definition broadly. And in this case, it really is that sense of kind of there's a certain harrowing quality to some of the things that happen to the teddy bears. It's not 200 pages of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's nothing like that.
Okay.
But there are 2 or 3 incidents they go through that are tense. Like where they have to deal with their own cells kind of falling apart, mm-hmm. or just the idea that teddies can be torn apart and what happens to them after that. And one time they encounter a dead animal, and they have to sort of navigate that physically and emotionally. So there are things that have that feeling of horror that you have as a kid, when you first see a dead animal. It's like, there is horror there. You probably weren't chased around by a chainsaw wielding maniac as a kid, but you did have these other experiences of horror that I think qualify as horror.
I completely agree. Like I said in sort of the beginning, Halloween is my favorite time of year. I adore horror films, and I try and tell all of my friends, I'm like, no, horror is a really wide genre. There's all kinds of horror. And there are, horror comedies that I adore, and there are horror movies for kids, which people kind of look at you and go, for kids? I'm like, yeah, there are definitely. Hocus Pocus, if you're a kid, is a scary movie. If you're an adult, maybe also, it's a kind of scary movie. So I think that your definition of horror makes a lot of sense. How did you go about kind of crafting this for a more middle grade audience? Were there things that you intentionally included or didn't include to make relatable and not too much? What was that process?
I don't think I held back on any of the content really. It was more the language of just the sentences, the way you construct at a sentence prose level. That obviously is different. Anytime I come up with a book, it's very rare. It's only happened a couple times where I know from the start what age group I'm writing for. Usually, I play around with ideas years, sometimes decades before I write them. So there's a long gestation process. And for most of that, sometimes even while I'm starting to write, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Or they're all ideas to me that I'm not thinking about where they slot in the marketplace. This one, though, it seemed pretty clear relatively early on that this was going to be for a younger age group. Mm-hmm. Like all my stuff, I kind of want it to be able to be read up to. Like I want adults to be able to read it, mm-hmm. Teens, and anyone.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's interesting. In the bookstore, we often sort of talk about genre, and in particular genre as it applies to age. There's the young adult genre, the middle grade genre, the early reader genre, and yet as I'm a 31-year-old adult, which I'm mostly okay with, and I still read young adult, and there are middle grades that I love, and I find that like good books are good books. So I don't know that it matters a whole lot, to anyone outside of the really intense, like, no, only middle grade is only for these ages. I think most of us who really love books just kind of feel like, yeah, if it's a good book, anyone can read it,
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's the same way where, I mean, if there's anything that I try to do in my act of consuming art, is to try to read broadly, watch broadly, listen broadly. So I try to, if we're talking about movies, watch movies from all over the world, every genre you can imagine, and that keeps my brain agile. I think if I was a horror writer and only watched horror movies, that would be a terrible mistake and disservice to opening your mind up to all sorts of other things.
Sure.
And so as long as you're doing that, there's no reason you wouldn't also be able to be inspired by something written for teenagers or something written for kindergartners, all these things should be in a omnivorous art consumer's diet, I think.
Oh, absolutely. We were talking a little bit before, and you know what? I'll ask the question again because I think it's a great question. What was something that you read when you were younger that really was one of those things that scared you? That you went, oh wow, that's a lights on, check the closet, check under the bed kind of read.
Yeah, for me, I can't think of any fictional works that did that, but definitely nonfiction books about ghosts and the paranormal, that kind of stuff really did scare me as a kid. I'd get those from the library or from the Scholastic Book Fair or something. And it would just be like a generic book called Ghosts. And it would, have some various alleged pictures of ghosts and things. And that stuff freaked me out. To the point where I knew where it was in the room and I would stare at it at night. That is the answer. It was always nonfiction.
No, and that's a like I sort of related to you. That was very similarly for me one of the things that really freaked me out as a kid. In I think second grade in Miss Bell's class, I was reading a true ghost book, and it definitely messed with me. But in sort of following with that, and where I was going before I decided, I'll just ask the question. How do you think? Well, let me back it up, and if we can, let's talk about a little bit more about the genre of horror, I guess.
Yeah.
Obviously, even when something is horror adjacent, we're reading this and we're not really wanting to be the protagonist. Like, we don't want to be chased by the axe-wielding maniac. We don't want to wake up in a dumpster and go, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? I have to have this adventure to get back to where I'm supposed to be. So what draws us, do you think, to those kinds of stories? Or does it depend kind of on the horror?
I mean, it depends on everything. Everyone's different. But, for me, I think, especially as a kid, it was the way I tested my boundaries. Like, I definitely had a yo-yo experience with horror where, I'd go a few years and be just super into it. And then a couple years where I couldn't watch it and make me physically ill. And I'd always go back, though. And that always going back was, I think I was always fascinated by my own reaction to it. And I think as a kid, that's a safe way to figure out what am I okay with? What am I not okay with? And that thing that I wasn't okay with, well, maybe I'm okay with it now. And so you go back in and you try it again. And I did that to such an extent. I guess I was, a weird kid, but I remember like I would, if I was scared of what was under my bed, I would go under the bed.
Yeah. Like
I would try to kind of scare myself that way. I don't know why, but it sort of fits into my sort of a lifelong experience with horror, because I have no interest in being truly horrified in real life.
Right. I mean, I have a fondness for vampire movies. I love of all the mythical horror creatures. Vampires are a top 10 for me. I love it. But if vampires were real, that would be horrible. That would be the worst. I'm very happy that that's not a thing. And I don't know what draws me continually to that. We have a question in our live chat from Sarah. Sarah would like to know if you have liked or read Brahms' toy-centric horror novels, specifically The Plucker.
The what?
The Plucker.
No, okay. I don't know what these are. No.
Yeah, no, I don't know them either. So, Sarah, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit in the chat, and we'll get back to you, that would be awesome.
The one that sticks in my mind, as far as like toy stories go, Corduroy. He was the guy. He was the bear in the department.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wakes up in a department store. That I remember reading and being creeped out by. Like, there was something very eerie about the idea when you're a kid about being all alone in a closed down dark space like that. So I think that stuck with me. It wouldn't surprise me if a little bit of that affected this trilogy.
Oh, very cool. Okay. I remember reading Corduroy. I don't know, now I have to look at it again and go try and view it through the creepy lens and go, all right, so where's the creepy? But I like doing that stuff in general. I, very similar to you, have a real love/hate relationship with horror movies. I tend to have moments where I get really in depth and I'm like, all right, this is this weird movie and it's from Finland and I'm going to be really into it, and I did, and then it became an American movie and it's Let the Right One In, and it is a great movie. But then I'll go through other phases where I'm like, I don't want to watch anything. It's rom-coms. That's what I'm watching right now. Just rom-coms and World War II movies, and just kind of not. Hold on. It's a graphic novel about a jack-in-the-box that comes to the defense of the boy who abandoned him after he wakes up abandoned under the bed. Huh.
I like that. Jack-in-the-boxes are creepy, so right. I like that.
I feel like Jack-in-the-Box is so. If there's a level of creepy toy, obviously the creepiest toy is the monkey with the cymbals that just sits there and clangs. That's not a toy that you give anyone you like. That is the toy you give to someone who you deeply dislike. I feel like Jack-in-the-Box is under that, but I don't know how far.
This like clowns like this might be up there somewhere.
Yeah, but clearly, that's the kind of thing, I feel like with the monkey, you can try and defend your choice and go, no, it's a monkey, it's a toy. If I gave that to someone and was like, this is for your kid, that would not be a thing that would go over well. But, yeah, so, with the horror genre, obviously we don't want to be chased. Obviously we are drawn to it, whether it's, because we want to test our boundaries, whether it's because there's sort of a level of empathy that we can have, with slasher films, obviously, in a weird way, we kind of root for the slasher at times. But when it comes to reading horror, because I do think that reading horror and watching horror are very different things. You can't use jump scares, for example, when you're writing a horror novel. What are some of the tools you can use to make your book scary?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, jump scares are hard. You can kind of do jump scares in comic books with the page.
Yeah.
But they're really difficult to do in books. Now, you can do it. There's a technique that I've used once or twice that's risky.
Okay.
And that's burying a scare in the middle of a long paragraph. That you risk someone just scanning by it and not seeing it. So you got to be careful about that. But I've done it a couple times.
Okay.
I think mostly you're dealing more with dread. You can really use perspective to dig into to truly terrible thoughts, and minds can spiral away from you, and perspective can skew a character's thoughts. I think all those tools generally make horror books for me a richer experience than movies generally, because you're able to really take as long as you need to lay whatever tracks that you're doing. It's really all just it's all just writing. It's all just what makes good writing. I don't know that the tools are all that much different than if you were writing a different genre, really.
Okay.
And it's interesting because although I write a lot of horrible things, it's usually my intent while I'm writing, that page is rarely scary. It's more like I want to win you over about something, or I want to write beautifully about something. It's weird. The horror kind of almost happens on a different level, like on a higher sort of outlining the plot level. But on a beat by beat basis, I'm usually not thinking about horror, oddly enough.
Okay, very cool. So it's almost the incidental, I guess. So you mentioned your other writing, and you've written a lot. I mean, you've been nominated for and won a number of awards. So what made you, or what helped you make the decision, I guess is maybe the better way to put it, to go from, adult horror, young adult science fiction to middle grade living teddy bear adventure? I love it, but how did you make that decision to change it up a little bit?
Well, I am by nature kind of prolific. Mm-hmm. I like working on multiple things at once. Some people hate that, but I love it. Having 5 projects going at once tends, I find, to help the other projects. They all are able. It's like I was saying, if you watch a horror movie followed by a dramatic foreign film from Finland or whatever, each one of those is like a palate cleanser. It sort of refreshes your mind. So I find multiple projects beneficial. Mm-hmm. And I just have this yearning to write and experiment with all sorts of spaces. I want to keep the process feeling very fresh. If I'm, just writing another book, I always, try to make problems for myself and make things more difficult for myself, whether it's something formally or in the perspective or something that it forces me to think differently than I have in the past.
Okay.
So one way of doing that is by writing in different formats or in age groups. So that's a way to wake me up. So when I'm writing They Threw Us Away, it's like, okay, this is not like something I've done before because of the language. It's going to force me to work harder because I'm not familiar with the space.
Very cool. I like that. That's a very ambitious approach to it. Sort of like I was saying to you before the show, I'm always blown away by people who are able to write anything. And so you looking at it and going, okay, I feel, I write some adult horror, I write my young adult sci-fi, okay, yeah, but I want to do something different now because I want to challenge it and push myself. That's a really, really admirable trait. So,
well, it doesn't feel admirable. It just feels like innate,
Yeah.
I can't. When I see people writing, 20-part series. More power to them, but I can't fathom being that interested in something that specific. Like I just want to be I want to create brand new things constantly.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So would you say in general that you're more of a plotter or more of a gardener when it comes to your writing?
What's a gardener?
So I stole that from an interview that I saw once. So a plotter, obviously, like you have it laid all out, and you're like, all right, this will happen on this beat, and then we go here, and then we go here, and then we go here. Whereas with a gardener, it's more like, I'm going to plant some seeds and start writing, and then eventually the story's going to do what it's going to do.
Well, I'm more of a plotter, I guess. Mm-hmm. I've written a number of very long books, 600, 800-page books. So with those especially, you don't want to go 300 pages down the wrong route. You want to have some sort of structural integrity to the machine you're building. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, I've found, because I've done it both ways, generally I am an outliner because I've found that it actually frees up the writing.
Okay, cool.
Because if I know that I sort of have this, not safety net exactly, but I have a certain next point that I'm going to get to at some point, it allows me to really just let go and be completely free with the writing because I know I'm not going to wander too far off the trail because I have a next plot point that I'm going to hit at some point.
Sure.
So it makes the writing feel actually deeper and richer and more unpredictable, actually.
No, that makes complete sense to me as well. And like I said, it's interesting. I think that I've talked to people from all ranges. I've talked to people who tell me, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to write. I just sit down and I have this scene and I want to get to it, and I don't know how we're going to get there. And then I have people, who say, no, everything is kind of plotted out. So it's interesting to sort of see that there's no, obviously it's got to be the correct answer for you, but there's no like universal. Because when I first started doing these in my brain, because what do I know? I was like, well, they're all professional writers, and clearly, like, there is a correct method to do this, and I've just learned. It just depends on the person, really.
I mean, you definitely develop methods, but again, I never want to get too comfortable in those methods. I want to shake it up a little bit.
So does that mean that at some point you're going to try the approach of, I'm just going to see where the story takes me? Just really...
Yeah. I mean, last October I published a book called Blood Sugar that was written that way.
Oh,
that was really just, that was a book that I put a whole bunch of challenges down, really on the sentence level too. Like, that was a book where I decided, because of the character's point of view, I wasn't going to use any fancy punctuation. So no dashes, no hyphens, no semicolons, no colons. I took away a lot of those tools so that I only had commas, periods, exclamation points. And that created a new kind of voice, because I wanted to strip it down and be simple. And you'd be surprised when you get rid of the tool of italics, for example. It's hobbling in a way. Like, you can't do the things you normally do, so you have to find ways to write around them and come up with new solutions. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense though. I've always wondered, obviously when you're writing and you have to write a genius character, someone who is, a Holmes-like person, that's got to be really hard. But by the same token, it also has to be very hard to write someone who is incredibly dumb. Just not, whether, or even, heck, someone who views the world very differently from how you do. That's got to be a real challenge as well. In your writing, have you ever had trouble not getting into the character, but expressing the character because they're just so different from how you are, I guess?
I mean, undoubtedly I have. I mean, I probably have that problem constantly, but I don't know that it's ever ultimately been a problem. I feel like I find a way into it, and I've gotten better with it over the years. I can think back to like my second book and struggling with one of the characters, and then every time I'd rewrite, I'd basically just redo the character from scratch and give him a new way of speaking. Once I gave him a crazy accent, just to see if that would awaken something in me that clue me into who this person was. So I think in the short term, it's always a problem. In the long term, nothing sticks out as having tripped me up to a really problematic level.
What are some of the, you mentioned like giving an accent or just rewriting them. What are some of the other tools or tricks you've used to help when you run into that situation when you go, I don't know what to do with this person?
Yeah, I mean, generally that's because of a lack of thought. A lot of this stuff I want, like I said, I dwell on these things for sometimes quite often years and years. So usually during those years, one of the things I'm doing is I'm figuring out who the characters are. So if I'm writing a book and I get to a character, and this does happen, or a scene where all I know about the scene is, A gets mad at B, and that's all I know. That will slow you down, because the possibilities are too infinite. So that's so character work. As far as like tricks to do it, there's not really any tricks. They're just sort of putting in the work ahead of time. Sometimes you can base a character off someone or someone you saw in a movie or a documentary or something. Sometimes you can sort of hang. Sometimes if you really, even if you just have a physical grasp of them, that can inspire certain character traits.
Okay, yeah. So what I'd like to do is turn to our live chat and let you guys know, hey, if you have any final questions, why don't you go ahead and put them in there. I've got 3 last big questions, and then I will come back, ask your questions at the end, and then you guys get to have the final word, which I've had a bad habit of not doing. So we're going to try and be better about that today. So my first big, super intense question. Not really, but it's the last questions. They're fun, though. Of the worlds that you've created, if you had to live in one of them, which one would it be and why?
Well, this is tough because most of the worlds I've created are pretty terrible.
And I thought it was a good question because of it. It was like, okay, kind of choose your own destiny.
I mean, I'm going to cheat a little bit, I guess, and I'm going to choose this one. This is a duology called The Death and Life of Zebulun Finch. And it's really a historical epic, kind of. It's a 1,500-page story that goes through a century of American history. And I guess I choose that because I'm cheating. I'm saying, well, that kind of just covers American history, so why not live in that world where you get to experience different decades. There's some of these I just won't. I just couldn't possibly imagine.
That's not cheating. That's cleverly creating. That's a good answer. All right. My next question, and this is the one that I'm actually selfishly very excited about because it's always been something that I've wondered. It seems like in films and in books, at least in the United States, werewolves tend not to be scary. They sometimes are there. They're sometimes a threat. But they're never... I have never watched a werewolf movie and gone, oh man, that was intense. I've seen scary zombie movies, scary vampire movies, demon movies, ghost, everything. Never werewolves. Why do you think that is? And how would you... If someone came to you and said, all right, we're going to write a werewolf book. We're going to write a scary werewolf book. What would be the keys?
I don't know that I've seen one either. But keep in mind, once I became an adult, whatever, no movies scare me. Okay. I love movies. I enjoy them a lot, but I'm never scared. So this is a pretty tall bar.
Okay.
For me. I think if someone said to me, all right, you have to write a werewolf book and make it scary, I would definitely focus on the body horror element of it.
Okay.
Sort of the moments of transformation are what's scary to me.
Yeah.
If it's a wolf, I'll leave that off the page. You can imagine that. But those moments of like going into or coming out of feel like they would be rich with unsettling feelings, and I think I'd play around in that space.
Yeah. No, I like as I'm just sort of like thinking about it. It's always the fingers, right? The elongate and the nails, and it's like, no, that's not. All right, so yeah, that's the key, is not to worry about what the Wolfman is like, because, okay, yeah, it's a big monster, cool.
Yeah, I mean, the wolf itself is, I don't think, that very scary. It's just a big wolf. It's like a bear. Like, bears are scary, sure, but, I mean, I don't feel like a wolfman is more scary than a bear. I think that the person who knows that they're turning into a werewolf is scary.
Yeah.
Because they have that knowledge, and what are they going to do with it? Who are they going to take out? You know.
And there's also got to be, there's the question, I guess, if you're fighting it and you don't want to do this, but then you wake up and like you ate your enemy, you ate this person you didn't like, and maybe you like that a little bit. Okay. Make it less about the monster and more about the monstrousness of what's going on to this person. Okay. All right, yeah, because I've always wondered about that, and it seems like, when you think about the big classic monsters, werewolf, vampire, Frankenstein, and like 2 out of 3 have been scary, and the third one I'm like, oh yeah, no, there's Dog Soldiers, which is a fun movie, and it has never seemed like a thing. And so for my third and probably final, I say final, it may end up being that one of these questions I'm seeing in the live chat makes me think of another one. But for my third and final question, if you could give a piece of advice to yourself with your first novel, if you could go back in the way, way back machine and go, hey, you don't know this about the writing, but here's something that's going to help you, what would that be? You can only give one.
This is to myself, like back when I was publishing my first book.
Yes.
That's a good way to put it, because when people say if you go back to when you were a kid and give yourself advice, that's so hard.
Yeah.
Change.
You're like, invest in Microsoft. That's the advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what the answer is, because when I published my first book, which is called The Monster Variations, which is easily my least read book, I accepted a few, I can think of like one or two editorial changes that I regret. That I would never, I think it's your first book. I wasn't, I don't know what's going on. But there's these are little things. These are like a line that was put in for clarity that I wish weren't there, because I think it's stronger without it. And then sort of a little half scene that was added again to provide clarity to something that I think would have been stronger, left mysterious. So I would just kind of tell myself to make my opinions on those small things more strongly known.
Okay.
Because they all these years later they bother me.
Yeah. No, you are the creator. Stick by your guns a little bit. I like it. Okay. So we do have a question, and that question is, it sounds as if this might be a bit of a sad story. Obviously, the abandonment. Is it a sad story?
Well, I don't think the overriding feeling to it, I think, is adventure.
Okay.
But they're not like whooping and hollering adventure. Like, this is adventure with stakes. So this isn't one of those like middle grade adventures where that it's all going to work out. It might not work out for all these teddies. So I think that the sort of, if you look at it from afar, the sort of general premise is sad. These teddies have been thrown away, but that's because we don't know why they've been thrown away. There might be a very good reason they've been thrown away. Mm-hmm. We just don't know yet. So there's some sadness in a sense that it's very confusing, like what happened, what did we do? That's sort of an inherently sad feeling. But I think that as the plot rolls out, it's more adventure-y, I think. Mm-hmm. But it's a little bit spooky here and there too.
Very cool. And this is another question we've got from our email. I can't have my email up on the screen with everything else. I have to look down for this. But do the teddies have a purpose? Is there a role for them to play in teddiness? I assume what they meant by that is, does being a teddy mean you have a role?
Well, they think so. They believe they're born with the innate knowledge that their role is to find a child, and then that child will then have a teddy, and then the child will hug the teddy and they'll drift off into forever sleep, which is just,
oblivion. Yeah,
oblivion. You're not there anymore. You don't have to worry about life. But the sort of the tension is that as the teddies live and exist, as they try to figure out what they've done, even though life is scary and difficult, they're tasting it, they're experiencing it, and they begin to wonder, certainly in this book and then more in the next book, now that we've experienced this, are we still okay going back to the old plan? Are we still okay just having forever sleep and winking out like that, now that we know what life is and all of its terrors, but also all of its glories?
Mm-hmm. I think, it's funny, when you first mentioned, the sleep, basically, to me, I was like, that does not sound like the thing I would be angling for. Like, existence sounds really good. Yeah, it's awful, and there's roadkill, and there's sadness, but also there are tacos, and there's, like, sunshine, and there's happiness. So, I think that's a really, really, I guess, beautiful sort of central tension. And, like I said, it spawned a question in me, because it never fails, and I always try and say, I'll let the audience ask the last ones, and then I go, oh, but I have a question now. And it's, I can be a little selfish. I'm allowed. I checked. So,
Sure.
with that central tension of kind of looking around at the world and going, maybe just ceasing isn't the best thing in the world. And again, if this is too spoiler, you just go, hey Drew, it's a spoiler, we're not going to go there. Does the story of Proto sort of answer why the Big Sleep would be such a good thing?
The story of Proto will answer a lot of questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really, the book has a ton of questions. Book one leaves a lot of open-ended questions. There's a mysterious voice that the Teddy talks to.
Okay.
That I don't have any idea who it is, but out of all my projects, actually, the Teddy's plot is my favorite plot that I've ever constructed.
Ooh.
I think when all the pieces come together at the end of book 3, it's going to be really satisfying and surprising. I think it's if I do say so myself, it's pretty clever. The conclusion of everything. So I think everything's going to be answered.
Okay. Awesome. There's something really nice about knowing that at the end we get our answers.
Yeah. Right.
Well, first of all, or I guess last of all, Daniel, thank you so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun. It's not often I get to talk and nerd out about horror with anyone. Usually that's like a thing I have to test the waters and be like, have you ever seen a scary movie? Are you cool with those? So this was fun for me, and I like I like books. I like stories where the characters sort of question their own reality, and you manage to do that with teddy bears. So, hats off to you. That's spectacular. And to our crowd, thank you for being here as well. You guys were awesome. They're now all debating. I think they're trying to figure out how to write a werewolf novel. If you guys figure it out, let Daniel know, not me. I'm not. You don't want. It will be bad. It will be a bad one if I get involved. But if I may, I'm going to shamelessly plug for just a moment. You can get They Threw Us Away at Town Book Center in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. We have it on the shelves. You can come in. In fact, when you first walk in, it's right there on your left. We've got a whole section that we built just for the people who've been nice enough to talk with us here. If you don't live in Pennsylvania and you want to support a local bookstore because, it's hard out there, you can. Town Book Center has a website. You can buy our books. You can buy the books online with us at townbc.com. That's TOW, N as in Nike, E as in Echo, B as in Bravo, C as in Charlie.com. So, again, Daniel, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, my pleasure. I'm always up for talking about horror.
Awesome. Well, it's sort of become a joke, but the more and more I talk with people, the less and less I wonder if it's a joke. We are going to have to get everyone together, and we'll do a big panel of all the different authors we've had, and we're all just going to hang out and talk about books, and I think that'll be great. But
Well, you just let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for coming in tonight, and have a great rest of your night. And if I don't see you, have a happy Halloween. Bye.
See you.